Hello, I'm R.A. Spratt, and I want to welcome people joining us this week on the Yoto podcast platform. Now, just so you know, most of the bedtime stories I tell here are standalone stories. But over the last year, we have been dipping in and out of the epic story of Odysseus, the hero from ancient Greek mythology. And this week, I'm going to be telling the second last installment of that tale. So if you can jump in right here, that'll be fine. I'm sure you'll pick it all up. But if you did want to go back to the beginning and start from the first episode, you can search back through the episodes. The first episode's called Odysseus, as told by Nanny Piggins, and it dropped on January 8th, 2025. Or you can go back and listen to any of the other episodes. You're going to find fairy tales, myths, legends, and mysteries. I hope you enjoy them all. Now let's get into it. Hello and welcome to Bedtime Stories with me, R.A. Spratt. Well, I hope you're having a great week. My week is off to a hectic start, but it is Monday and I am recording the podcast, so I'm doing better than last week. But anyway, we're going to do another installment of the Odyssey today. I'm very excited because this has been commissioned as a book. That means I get to work on it during the week. It's not just because it's an extracurricular and extra thing I do. I usually have to do it on the weekend, but so it's been fun actually working on the podcast during the week. So this, I think it's either the second or third last installment. So let's just get into it. All right, here we go. The story of Odysseus and the Dirty Laundry, as told by Nanny Piggins. Nanny Piggins had kept the children home from school, and to be fair, she felt they genuinely needed the day off for medical reasons. Because they were getting so close to the end of the story of Odysseus, she was seriously concerned that they might explode from the suspense of not knowing what happened next if they were forced to wait another 6 hours during the school day. So, as soon as Mr. Green left the office, Nanny Piggins, Boris and the children ran to the kitchen, got out the emergency chocolate chip cookies. Nanny Piggins kept 5 dozen chocolate chip cookies in a glass case, with the instructions on the lid saying, "Break glass in an emergency." They ended up breaking the glass most days because there was rarely a day when Nanny Piggins didn't urgently need to eat chocolate chip cookies. So anyway, they all munched away as Nanny Piggins resumed her tale. "Okay, so we left off with Odysseus face down on a muddy riverbank," said Nanny Piggins, "after swimming for days across the open ocean in a wild storm. With the last of her energy, she dragged herself up the bank, crawled under a bush, and fell asleep. Her skin had been scraped off when she was bashed against the rocks, her hair was caked in salt from the water, and she'd lost all her clothes completely several days ago." "Why did she take her clothes off?" asked Michael. "Well, it seemed like a good idea at the time," said Nanny Piggins. "When she was struggling to not drown, the clothes were weighing her down, so she tore them off, except for the magical sash she'd been given, but even that she had to take off and throw into the sea so it would float back to the helpful mermaid who lent it to her. So our story begins here with Odysseus deeply asleep under a bush. She slept for the rest of the day and the night and the next day as well. She just kept sleeping and sleeping. Athena began to worry that Odysseus might never wake up, and if she did wake up, she'd look such a fright with the nakedness and the injuries and the sunburn and the salt that the local people would take her for some sort of feral witch woman and cut her head off just to be on the safe side. Athena realised she needed someone to take care of Odysseus, so she went to the royal palace. The king of the Phaeacians had a beautiful young daughter called Nausicaa. She was fast asleep in her chamber when Athena entered and spoke to Nausicaa through a dream. "And told her to rescue Odysseus from beneath the bush?" asked Michael. "No, Athena was more subtle than that. She told Nausicaa to do the laundry." "What?" asked Samantha. "Well, Nausicaa was a well-raised princess. If you told her to go looking for a naked, shipwrecked sailor hiding under a bush, she would never do that. It would be unladylike. So Athena told Nausicaa that if she wanted to get a nice husband, she would need to do the laundry." "Really?" said Samantha. "You have to remember this was the ancient mythology days, and princesses didn't have jobs back then. They weren't taught coding or economics or how to drive a car, mainly because a car hadn't been invented yet. So for princesses, their job was just about getting married, which for a princess meant wearing a lot of pretty dresses, which required a lot of doing the laundry. And since the washing machine also had not been invented, washing pretty dresses involved driving a mule cart over to the river and bashing the clothes on rocks in the stream. And so, after Athena talked to her in her dreams, Nausicaa woke up and had a sudden, inexplicable desire to do the laundry. She gathered up her maids and all the dirty laundry in the palace, enough to fill an entire mule cart. Then they rode over the hill to the river. Nausicaa and the maids worked hard all morning, bashing the clothes on the rocks and rinsing them in the running water. Then they laid the clothes out to dry in the sun. And while they waited, they played a vigorous game of soccer to pass the time. "Soccer," said Derek. "I didn't know that women played soccer back in the ancient Greek story days." "I know. Women's sport is always underreported," said Nanny Piggins. "So typical of Homer not to mention it." Anyway, it was a really gripping game. The handmaids were up 3-2 against the laundry maids when Nausicaa, who was playing for the laundry maids, had a shot at goal. It was a beautiful kick. It's so important for a young princess to know how to kick powerfully so they can kick unsuitable suitors if they say anything presumptuous. Nausicaa walloped the ball as hard as she could. It swooped through the air, looking like it was going wide, but at the last moment swung back in, and the goalkeeper totally missed it. Again, Athena may have had something to do with Nausicaa's sudden and unexpected ability to play soccer, like Lionel Messi. Unfortunately, there was no goal net. The goalposts were just 2 laundry baskets, so the ball landed in a bush. "Ow!" cried the bush, although of course we know it wasn't the bush talking. It was in fact the naked shipwreck survivor underneath, Odysseus. The maids were horrified to hear the sound of a person so nearby, so they all shrieked. Then Odysseus stood up, her hair sticking in every direction. She was salt-stained, bruised and battered by the sea. "And naked," said Michael. "Yes, but fortunately she'd had the good sense to grab a leafy branch and hold it across herself to protect her modesty." But it was still a shocking sight for the maids. They shrieked again and all ran off in different directions to hide under their own bushes. Except for Nausicaa. She bravely stood her ground. Odysseus realised that what she said next was crucial. She considered throwing herself at Nausicaa's knees and begging for help, but she realised that might come across as a bit needy, so she spoke cautiously instead. Hello. I'm having a bit of a bad day. A bad 23 years' worth of days, in fact. My ship has been wrecked, and my replacement homemade ship has been wrecked too, and all 550 of my men have been killed. At least, I assume they've all been killed. Most of them were eaten by monsters, and they definitely died. I saw it happen with my own eyes. But a lot of them were also just swept out to sea, and maybe 1 or 2 of them survived. But overall, I have had a really terrible run at retaining employees. Anyway, it hasn't just been work problems. I haven't seen my husband or son for 23 years, so they're going to be really cross with me that I've missed so many birthdays and anniversaries. So things are getting pretty desperate for me. So please, could you help me? "Well, despite being naked and looking like you've been pulled through a hedge backwards," said Nausicaa, "I can tell from your excellent manners that you are a noble traveller, and the laws of hospitality mean that we must provide you with food and shelter, no matter how bedraggled you may be. If you come with us, my father, the king, will make you welcome at the palace." "Oh, thank you, that'd be lovely," said Odysseus. I don't suppose you've got any clothes I could borrow. Just a rag or something would be nice. I can't exactly meet a king wearing nothing but 2 leafy branches." "Well, I do happen to have several dozen party dresses with me," said Nausicaa, "so you can wear whichever one you like." So Nausicaa found a lovely, off-the-shoulder, golden party toga that really suited Odysseus. It complemented her sunburn, then gave Odysseus some olive oil to wash with. "Olive oil?" asked Derek. "Yes, they didn't have soap back then," explained Nanny Piggins, "so people would clean themselves with water and olive oil." "Did that work?" asked Samantha. "Well, it got the dirt off," said Nanny Piggins, "and it made everybody smell of salad, which isn't my favourite food smell, but there were a lot of worse smells back in the ancient Greek story days, so smelling like a salad was an improvement." When Odysseus stepped back into the clearing, the maids gasped in awe. Now that she was clean and wearing a fabulous party dress for the first time in 23 years, Odysseus looked amazing again. Regal authority vibrated off her. "Wow, you really are good-looking," said Nausicaa. "I know," said Odysseus. "It is a genetic burden all the women in my family have to endure." So Odysseus walked with the maids back to the palace. She was worried about the reception she'd get there, but she needn't have been. As soon as he laid eyes on Odysseus, the king recognised her. "I know you! You're Odysseus, Queen of Ithaca!" exclaimed Alcinous. "Everyone thought you died 15 years ago when you didn't come home from the Trojan Wars." "Oh no," said Odysseus, "I'm not dead. I've just been having a really bad journey." "Traffic?" asked the king. "No, monsters mainly," said Odysseus, "and people falling in love with me and forcing me to stay on their islands." "Oh, hard luck," said Alcinous. "I really must get home," said Odysseus. "Could you please lend me a boat?" "Well, we are the Phaeacians," said King Alcinous. "We pride ourselves on making sure all weary travellers return home safely. So yes, I shall arrange for my men to row you back to Ithaca first thing tomorrow morning." "You will?" said Odysseus. "So you're not going to eat me or trap me or suck me into a whirlpool?" "No," said King Alcinous, "but we'd love to hear the story of your journey. You must have met so many interesting people and had such wonderful adventures along the way." "Well, yes, I have literally been to Hades and back," said Odysseus. "Wow," said Alcinous. "Okay, I promise to lend you my fastest ship with all my strongest rowers and stocked full of food and riches and treasures if you come to dinner tonight and tell us the whole tale of your journey." Odysseus realised this would be a very long storytelling, but he agreed to the bargain, a tale in exchange for a trip back to his home of Ithaca. "Now, children," said Nanny Piggins, "I have been telling you Odysseus's tale for many weeks now, so you know yourself it is a very long story." Odysseus started talking as soon as they sat down at the dinner table, and she kept talking through the entree, the main course, the dessert, the second dessert, and the third dessert. She was still talking when midnight snacks came around. Eventually, as the sun was rising and the servants were beginning to bring in the breakfast food, Odysseus got to the bit where she escaped from Calypso and washed up face down on the muddy riverbank and met the Princess Nausicaa. "Wow! That was an epic journey," said Alcinous. "Someone should write that down." "I'm on it," said Homer, an annoying writer who had been at the dinner the whole time. Alcinous rolled his eyes. "Well, try and get it right this time. Don't make up bits you missed." The king turned to Odysseus to explain. "Homer means well, but he's very bad at portraying realistic female characters. He can never capture their voices right." "Oh, King Alcinous," said Odysseus, "I'm so grateful for your kindness and all the food, but please, I long to return to my homeland and my good husband Penelope." "Penelope? Isn't that a girl's name?" queried the king. "No," said Odysseus firmly. "Okay," said Alcinous. Odysseus looked more than a little deranged with exhaustion, so the king decided it was better to be kind than to be right and did not pursue the argument. She led Odysseus down to the ship, and as soon as she stepped aboard, Odysseus collapsed on some rugs on the deck. Having told her tale, the weight of shame and grief lifted off her, and for the first time in a long time she felt hope. So Odysseus fell into a deep and restful sleep. The sailors pushed off and began to row her across the sea. Odysseus slept the whole way. She didn't even wake up when they landed on the shores of her beloved Ithaca. So the good Phaeacians lifted her out of the boat and carefully placed her in some shaded woodlands, with all the treasures the king had given her. Then they got back in their boat and rowed away. "So Odysseus was finally home," said Samantha. "Not quite," said Nanny Piggins. "She was in Ithaca, but her home was the palace, and she couldn't just walk in there." "Why?" asked Michael. "You have to imagine what it was like," explained Nanny Piggins. "Odysseus was 23 years older. When Odysseus left, she was a beautiful young woman. Now she was a worn old woman, although still staggeringly beautiful. She looked very different, and Ithaca looked very different. Much had changed. Most significantly, the palace was still packed full of suitors trying to marry her dear husband Penelope, so she still had much work ahead of her if she was going to reclaim her throne. But that is a story for another day. "Oh, you can't leave it there," said Derek. "She's so close to home." "You're right," said Nanny Piggins. "I need to tell you what happened to the Phaeacians." "What, you mean the nice men who rowed Odysseus home?" asked Samantha. "Yes." A short time later, Poseidon woke up. Being a god, he had a flexible schedule and often slept in. Poseidon was horrified to discover that despite all his best efforts to kill Odysseus, Odysseus had in fact survived the horrific storm and was now safe and fast asleep on his homeland of Ithaca. Poseidon totally blew his stack. He stormed around to Zeus's place and had a tantrum so epic, even a 2-year-old lying face down on the linoleum floor of a supermarket aisle, pounding the ground with his fists and screaming as loud as he could, was nothing compared to the tantrum that Poseidon threw that morning. "I did everything I could to kill Odysseus, and the Phaeacians totally ruined it," complained Poseidon. "Well, you're the one who didn't kill her properly in the first place," said Zeus. "But she would be dead if the Phaeacians hadn't interfered," argued Poseidon. "I want to punish them." "Fine, whatever," said Zeus, who wasn't an early riser and quite wanted to get back to bed himself. "I'm going to kill them all and surround their whole island with a ring of mountains so they can't get in or out." "Well, that's a bit excessive," said Zeus. "All they did was give Odysseus a lift." "Well, I've got to do something," said Poseidon. "Odysseus stabbed my son in the eye." "Your son was trying to kill Odysseus." "Well, that's Odysseus' fault for looking so delicious." "Look, why don't you just transform the Phaeacian sailors into solid rock as a warning to the other Phaeacians not to ever interfere again?" That does sound dramatic," said Poseidon. "All right, I'll do that." So the poor, unsuspecting Phaeacian sailors were just about to row back into their home harbour. They could see their friends and family waiting and waving to them up on the headland, when suddenly a terrible wave drew up out of the ocean as Poseidon himself rose up out of the sea. The men didn't have time to scream in terror or leap overboard, because as soon as Poseidon slammed his hand down upon the ocean, all the men and the boat they were sitting in was instantly transformed to stone. "Oh, that's horrible," said Samantha. "You mean just like Medusa used to do to people with her eyes?" asked Michael. "Yes, but Medusa only did it to people one at a time. Poseidon turned all 20 men and their boat into a rock in an instant. Then, satisfied with his work, he disappeared back into the ocean and went home." "What a rotter," said Samantha. "Yes, Zeus and Poseidon make quite a pair, and they were brothers too, so I hate to think what sort of childhood they must have had for them both to turn out that way." "They needed a good nanny, a nanny like you," said Michael. "Indeed," said Nanny Piggins. "If only children are exposed to lovingly prepared cake from an early age, they rarely turn out that badly." The end. Time for bed. But what about Odysseus' reunion with Penelope? They do get reunited, don't they? After 23 years away. It would be terrible if they were thwarted now. Well, you'll just have to wait and find out next time. The end. Time for bed. Well, that's it. I hope you enjoyed this story. So until next time, goodbye. Hello, it's me again. If you enjoyed listening to Bedtime Stories with R.A. Spratt, it would be really helpful if you could like, subscribe, follow, and or review the show on whatever podcast platform you're listening to now. Every little one of those digital affirmations helps, and the bigger this podcast gets, the more I can justify procrastinating from my real job to keep bringing these stories to you. Thank you.